Okay, great. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight for our Juvenile Justice Town Hall. My name is Kenny Boddye. I am the Occoquan District Supervisor on the Prince William County Board of Supervisors. And I'm joined tonight by Courtney Tierney, who's the Director of the Prince William County Department of Social Services. I'm also joined tonight by Jeff Homan, who's the Director of the 31st District CSU since 2010. 41 years total with the DJJ, which is the Department of Juvenile Justice. Also joining me is Greg Porter, Juvenile Court Service Unit Intake Supervisor, and then Dee Kirk, who is the Regional Program Manager of the Virginia Department of Juvenile Justice. Tonight is going to be a robust discussion about juvenile justice, where we've been, where we are currently in the county, and where we're seeking to go. In light of a lot of the events that have occurred over the last 6 months to the last couple of decades here in the United States, a lot of folks have taken interest in juvenile justice and have really decided to highlight and take on this issue in terms of advocacy, in terms of really looking at reforming our criminal justice system. We decided that we'd take that conversation and move it into what are we doing as Prince William County and what we can do to ensure that we're reforming our justice system. Before we sort of dive into the panelists and what we'll be discussing tonight, just wanted to remind everyone that my office is here to serve you, the constituents of the Occoquan District and Prince William County, and you can connect with us on our website at occoquandistrict.net. You can also connect with us on Facebook under Occoquan District Supervisor Kenny Boddye, and also on Twitter and Instagram as well. You can sign up for our newsletter on our website as well as on all of our social media to stay up to date with what the Occoquan District is up to serve you, the constituents of Prince William County. So what we're going to do right quick is we're going to go around and have each one of the panelists sort of just briefly introduce themselves. I know I already talked about their title, but they'll give a brief description of what they do and how their core function sort of handles and interacts with the juvenile justice system. First, I'd like to start with Ms. Courtney Tierney.
Thank you, Supervisor Boddye, and hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm Courtney Tierney. The Department of Social Services in Prince William County includes a division called Juvenile Services. This is unusual. Other localities, their Department of Social Services does not have a juvenile service division, but we do and have for years. And in the Juvenile Services Division, we have the Juvenile Detention Center, the Molinary Shelter for Youth, and a pretrial supervision program for home supervision. And that also includes a component for electronic monitoring. Supervisor Boddye, I did prepare some slides. Would this be a good time to show those?
Absolutely.
Okay. So just to give a little context, we are actually a customer, I think, for the 31st District Juvenile and Domestic Relations Court, and they order youth from Prince William County, Manassas, and Manassas Park to pre-dispositional programs. Pre-disposition means the youth have not gone to court yet to determine guilt or innocence. We have two detention alternatives: the Molinary Shelter for Youth, which is non-secure, and a pretrial supervision at home with electronic monitoring, and then the Juvenile Detention Center. All of the programs have a component that the Virginia Department of Juvenile Justice reviews. And it's important to know that even though the Molinary Shelter is residential, it is non-secure, but the Juvenile Detention Center is secure. I discussed the predisposition options. These are the ones we have in Prince William County. There are post-dispositional options through Mr. Homan's shop, and he can talk about that. But one of the things I want you to know on the right side where it says Local Community Placement Program, these are youth from our community who have gone through the court system. They were found guilty and they were placed usually in a secure facility near Richmond. As they get to the end of their sentence, they are brought back to the local community. And we have room for 8 males in the local community placement program in our detention center. Why this is important for them is that it brings them back home. It's much easier for them to have visits with their families, to set up whatever schooling or job that they may be ready when they are finished with their sentence, and they can set up any type of behavioral health or some sort of medical or behavioral counseling that they may need. We used to have boys and girls group homes. They were eliminated in 2008, and there used to be a day reporting center. That's for youth to go to after school, and we no longer have those in the community either. I'm going to zoom in here because this is the, here we go. This is how the process works. A juvenile's charged by law enforcement, alleged crime, and they are taken to the JCSU, Juvenile Court Services Unit. They review and process the complaint. They have a great objective, data-driven uniform assessment that they use. This has all been a part of juvenile justice reform. When they petition the juvenile court for a preliminary hearing, and that is based on this assessment, if they didn't feel that it needed to go to court, there are no charges filed, the juvenile's released. If they did, a preliminary hearing is held by the juvenile court to determine if the child should go to trial. So if they determine that they did not need to go to trial, the charges are dismissed and the juvenile is released. If they did decide to go to trial, then the juvenile court, 31st District, decides placement for the youth while awaiting to determine what happens with their hearing. One is that they are released to parental control while awaiting court. And that goes to our community system that we do have folks that go and visit the youth, make sure that they're going to school and so forth. And that can include electronic monitoring. The pretrial supervision. I'm sorry, I should have said one can just go to parental control. The other 3 options that the court has is the pretrial supervision, Molinary youth, and the juvenile detention center. At that point, the predisposition process ends and a final court appearance occurs. And then the child is either released, guilty, innocent, they are put in probation with Mr. Herman's shop, they could go downstate. There are a lot of things that can happen at that point, but we as the local department are no longer involved with that. The top 3 criminal charges for the JDC detainees have been assault, larceny, and robbery. The average length of stay is 32 days. A high percentage have prescribed psychotropic medication. We do have behavioral health services on site. Our staff has been trained a lot and are continuing to go through training for pro-social skills and pro-social engagement of the youth. We don't have guards in the back corner with their arms like this, just watching. We want engagement. We have life skills training, and we want staff to be able to take every opportunity as they get to know the youth to see what the issues are and in any way that they can help them. And we also have education. Prince William County Schools is embedded at the JDC in Molinary, and they educate the students there. We work very closely with whichever school the youth is in and with their teachers. We also have GED courses and a testing site at our JDC. And for those youth I told you about in the community placement program, we have Northern Virginia Community College classes as well. These are some of the reasons we are looking for a new juvenile detention center. We need more ability to separate youth. We're not able to have room to check for security of visitors. There's a lot of congestion. It was designed in the 70s. It's over 40 years old. It is not designed for the transformation of juvenile justice that we all want. There's lack of private space for meetings with families, legal. It is not a trauma-informed design. Employment skills training, it's not conducive to doing that. We have kitchen and laundry space that is inefficient. The design of the shower isn't good. We've now learned so much about ventilation system during the pandemic. That needs improvement. And our transformation efforts through the Virginia Department of Juvenile Justice, the design we have doesn't align with their trends. It's essentially functionally obsolete. Sorry, I keep hitting that. There's been a lot of discussion about bed size. Bed size of any new facility has not been determined. We did receive a grant from the Virginia Department of Criminal Justice Services to use a trauma-informed lens with a multidisciplinary group. The group has police, it has the court, it has a juvenile court services unit, it has behavioral health, all working together we even have sought youth that have been at the juvenile detention center to be part of the discussion for a system-wide improvements, a plan to increase the use of detention alternatives, reducing racial and ethnic disparities, identifying strategies to target youth with prevention services, and improving behavioral health. We have asked this group to provide their priorities for detention alternatives before a bed size is determined for a JDC. Now, the needs assessment that was done, there's quite a process with all of this, came back and said 110 beds. We knew that was way too many. The planning study that was just completed suggested 48 beds. That's the cap. It would never be bigger than that. But we also think that is too many. The design is the next phase. This has not been determined, the design. And that is where the bed size needs to be determined once we've vetted the detention alternatives. And a recommendation will be provided to the Board of County Supervisors because it is ultimately their decision about what to do and a bed size. This is the project schedule. We're moving along with it. We will be coming to the Board of County Supervisors for the capital improvement plan to discuss the design study. Should they want to move forward, we will do that. We're looking down the road here and perhaps a year from January, try to seek more funding from the General Assembly, start construction, occupy new facilities. But this is anticipated, estimated. There's a lot that needs to be done between now and then. So that's an overview. I know it was a lot. I know it was quick. So I see two questions. Do you want me to address those or do you want to move forward?
We'll move forward and we'll go back to those after we've gone through everyone else.
Great, thank you.
Yes, thank you for that, Ms. Tierney. Again, great information, a lot condensed into a very small but easy to digestible package, so I appreciate that. Just a couple of highlights, as she mentioned near the end there. One of the main purposes of this new JDC is, of course, to bring new and modern practices when it comes to dealing with the youth in the criminal justice system forward, actually have a facility that's designed for that. A lot of, as she mentioned, the challenges and issues we have with the current JDC simply cannot be overcome with the current structure of the building. So this new JDC is integral in us moving forward with new juvenile justice practices. Mr. Porter, is there anything you'd like to add to this? And you are muted.
All right, I got it. Actually, not much at this time. I'll entertain questions, but I guess since you called my name, my name is Greg Porter. I'm the supervisor juvenile intake. In juvenile intake, we're the gatekeepers for the juvenile domestic relations court. Intake officers determine probable cause. We're, I guess, one way for the audience to look at it, we're like magistrates for the juvenile system. And when we make those decisions, we use evidence-based assessment tools, and as well as we gather our information, and we make a determination of whether or not to send a case to court on a petition or divert it from court, and that diversion could be referrals to other community programs or working with the juvenile and their family unofficially in court to try to change that behavior. But if we do make a decision to petition a case for court, we also make a decision whether to release that child to the parents or detain, and if so, that's based on whether or not they're a danger to the community or themselves, and that we can't put other things in place to mitigate that danger. And if so, then they go to court. The next day, the court's in session. The judge will make a determination whether they should remain in detention pending trial or release them with conditions, without conditions.
Appreciate that, Mr. Porter, and thank you for everything that you're doing for our community and for our youth. So at this point, I wanted to open it up to Ms. Kirk and Mr. Homan. Anything you'd like to add with what Ms. Kearney just presented? And if so, feel free, but then especially after that, if you have anything you'd like to talk to when it comes to the current state of juvenile justice, especially in the county, but also statewide as well. We have a lot of new initiatives to help the youth and help divert folks. We also have the public defender's office. So any of those types of topics you'd like to speak on, please feel free.
Thank you, Mr. Boddye. We're a state agency. We are one of 32 state-operated court service units within the state of Virginia. In addition, there are also 2 locally operated court service units, one in Arlington and one in Fairfax. We provide a myriad of services for the citizens of the 31st Judicial District, to include the Prince William County and the citizens of Manassas and Manassas Park. Greg Porter just talked about intake. That is one of our 4 major programs, our intake services, that they provide a lot of the mandated processing of domestic relations civil complaints, to include child support, custody, visitation, child abuse protective orders, family abuse protective orders. They also work closely with ACT's Turning Points in providing support and services to clients seeking those types of protective orders over in the court. Juveniles accused of committing offenses are processed for formal court action or provided diversion. I'm real proud of our diversion efforts, and we can speak in more detail as we go along in terms of that. We're trying to keep as many low-risk offenders out of our system as possible, which is evidenced by our declining numbers over the past 10 years. And diversion is a major part of that. First-time offenders and juveniles with truancy issues are referred to other community resources or a restorative justice program, which is operated by our dispute resolution services, which is the part of my local budget with Prince William County. Additionally, we provide standard supervision services for all kids placed on probation by the juvenile court or released on parole from a juvenile correctional facility. They enforce probation and parole rules and orders of the court by imposing informal sanctions or taking court action. We collaborate closely with many community partners, to include schools, community service, CSB, public schools of all 3 jurisdictions, and all the CSA programmings for all 3 jurisdictions. Additionally, we have a gang response intervention team that is another locally funded program, working very closely with all 3 jurisdictions and the Northern Virginia Regional Gang Task Force, working with our gang involved and at-risk youth of gang involvement. Within our standard supervision services, we have an assessment unit. Any case that comes to us from the court and to be evaluated for potential placement on probation or for further services is submitted to our assessment unit. They do a comprehensive assessment utilizing evidence-based risk analysis and other measures to come to a determination as to what services are best in the best interest of the youth provided, and it's a standardized. What we have is a unit. Instead of having 15 probation officers doing it, we have it condensed down to a unit, a smaller unit, and that's all they do is do a quality assessment, and they provide a complete package for a probation officer to include a youth assessment and screening instrument, which is analysis of a risk and needs assessment, a completed social history investigation, and a supervision plan going forward. So it's a one-stop shop instead of spread out over a whole bunch of different areas. Also, we've increased our diversion so much that we've been able to form an entire diversion unit. We're going to get that one up and running here in the not too distant future because caseloads have come down, and we've been able to, through our workload study, is to reallocate our personnel within the unit, take advantage of those lower numbers. We also have 2 Prince William County funded programs. One is an intensive supervision program. We've had that in our budget since the late 90s, and it consists of a supervisor who is a state employee who supervises 5 Prince William County employees, and they provide community-based supervision serving high risk and serious offenders who require more supervision contacts than those provided by standard supervision. Sometimes standard supervision typically would require, depending on the level of supervision, maybe 1 to 2 contacts per month, maybe 3, depending on the level. But the intensive supervision program can provide 3 to 5 contacts per week to start. Standard supervision may refer them over for additional services for a period of 90 to 120 days, depending on the severity and needs of a particular kid and family. And they will work with that case, providing crisis intervention, life skills, networking of services, utilization of community-based services, numerous weekly supervision contacts with these high-risk kids, youth, and families. I can go on and on. They can stabilize the case to perhaps return it back to probation for standard supervision, and or release the kid from probation altogether if they've accomplished everything as per the court orders and they've stayed out of trouble. And then our last program that we have is the Office of Dispute Resolution Services. They provide mediation services coming from the Juvenile and Domestic Relation Court for all matters involving child custody, visitation, child and spousal support. Also, they do a restorative justice services for us, holding first-time juvenile offenders accountable for their wrongdoing through victim impact classes and face-to-face conferences attended by families and victims. And they also have a new truancy intervention program for cases referred to in terms of truancy matters. So we do a whole range of services locally, and and as you know, we've gone through a transformation over the past since 2014. And I'm going to defer to D. Kirk to sort of touch bases on that. But locally, I'm open for any questions regarding what we do here locally. And I just think the heart and soul of our unit are the probation officers and our administrative staff. Your admin staff deal with the clients as they come into our office. We've been open every day since COVID hit. We never did close. We are mandated to provide services for essential juvenile matters. And I just want to recognize Mr. Porter's efforts in maintaining that continuity of services for the citizens of our county in face of all the COVID issues we've been dealing with. And he's done a remarkable job, he and his unit. We've maintained all that service levels since the beginning. And at that, I'll just turn it over to Dee Kirk, and she could speak to more of the central office impacts and input at that point. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. Again, I'm Dee Kirk. I am the Northern Region Program Manager. As regional manager, I work closely with Mr. Holman and the other directors in the region, really helping to direct, guide, and support the work of the unit, the probation, parole, the admin. Really, they're supporting and working towards, particularly around our transformation goals. But overall, to meet our agency goal, which is, to protect the community by helping youth become productive citizens. Also, we have added to our mission the safety, connection, purpose, and fairness. And that's a lot of our framework, our strategic framework around transformation, which is important because it's for both youth and our staff around the safety, connection, and purpose. And also looking at probably the easiest way to describe what we've done, and this has been over the last going on 7 years, is a lot of work around reducing, reform, and replacing sort of outdated and what we've known to really not get the results that we were looking for when it comes to juvenile justice. So if you look at it on the community side, when we talk about reducing, we talk about reducing the, Mr. Holman talked about it, so did Mr. Porter, our diversion efforts, reducing our roles altogether, reducing the amount of youth who come into our system, and we've done fabulous work throughout the state around diversion with our diversion efforts, and really just keeping low-risk kids who really don't need to be in our system from getting further into it. And that has been a huge push for us, is making sure we're diverting every youth that can possibly be diverted out of our system. When we talk about reforming on the community level, I love what Mr. Holman talked about, his assessment unit. It really helps to know and understand who we are working with and whether or not they need to be with us for a short or longer period of time, what their risk levels are. It really helps to get the services in place immediately and make sure we begin serving that youth and their family as quickly as possible and understanding what it is they need to be successful. I think you talked a little bit about our SDM, Standardized Dispositional Matrix, which is one of our newer transformation initiatives. And that's around, if you're not diverted and you wind up, in our going to court, we're looking at what level of supervision, if any, do you need? So is it just some case management, some help getting referrals to services? Do you need to be on probation? Is it a commitment case? But we have a dispositional matrix, and what's most important about that, especially around the work we're doing with equity, is it gives sort of a level playing field. We really wanted to try and tackle justice by geography by creating assessment tools that take youth, regardless of where they're from or who they are, and looking specifically at, do they have similar criminal histories and similar charges, so that we are making sure we are treating youth fairly based on their risk level and the charge before us, as opposed to anything else. And we actually, the units complete that assessment pretty early on, and then we can make a recommendation. And that's what we're doing with these matrices, is we are making recommendations, and it goes along with our in-depth reports on the youth, just trying to make sure that the court has all the pertinent information to make the right decisions for a particular youth, and that we're fair in our estimations and in our recommendations, right? What else? We have equipped our intake, probation, and parole officers with skills and tools to help them perform. I would say better, but differently, more evidence-based, proven practices that we know work with our population, and really helping them build a skill level to be able to work with the youth, the families, and the community, and be able to provide services. We've replaced how we used to provide services with what we call our regional service coordinators. So we've able to increase and enhance the services that we are providing, that they do have to refer the youth out to, and really making sure that the youth that we are working with are receiving the most proven and evidence-based services that are available. This particular service coordinators also ensure quality assurance throughout. So they are making sure that the service providers we're working with are qualified, that they're doing what they say they're doing, they have outcome measures. So, and those are things to just make sure they're doing what they say they're going to do. So we've put in so many, the actual system itself has transformed tremendously. The goal was really to go from any type of adult looking system to a youth-focused community treatment type programming, both in the community and in our one facility that we still currently run. So there's been transformation from the beginning to the end with all of the work that we're doing. And I'm really trying quickly to sum it all up. So if you have questions or Mr. Holman, if I'm missing something, please feel free to add. Just really trying to sum up our transformation efforts so that you can see what the state is offering and where we're going with juvenile justice and how we're working with youth that we come in contact with. Jeff,
Sure.
Mr. Holman, can you think of anything that I...
Well, with regard to the transformation, we got away from the use, like Ms. Kirk said, the use of the adult-style correctional facilities. And in 2014 and through 2016, we closed the last two, well, almost two facilities, the Reception and Diagnostic Center and Beaumont Correctional Facility. And the General Assembly let us keep that money instead of returning it to the general fund. And those monies were $6.4 million in the first year and $27.5 million thereafter. In addition, the General Assembly added $2.9 million a year for the community placement programs, which there are 8 or 9 around the state, one of which is in Prince William County. All of that money we were allowed to keep to put into community treatment programming that Ms. Kirk just talked about with evidence-based associates here in the northern region for us specifically to pay for community treatment programming. So we've been able to reinvest all of those savings into treatment programming for us locally to reduce our demand on the local Comprehensive Services Act, for one thing, monies that Prince William County is shelling out every year. The only thing we now have to approach CSA for is residential treatment services. And it's been a great savings for Prince William County. And it's educated our staff, like Dee said, and all these new treatment modalities, EPICS, effective practices in community supervision, an evidence-based program out of the University of Cincinnati. It is also being utilized in the Office of Criminal Justice Services upstairs of our office, as well as adult probation and parole. And it's utilized throughout our system, and it provides a seamless transition from probation to parole and throughout. And the effectiveness is demonstrated by the numbers that we're seeing in terms of the least amount of kids coming out of or coming into our system and not returning. And I just think the trends in general, crime trends are down. The numbers of charges coming into intake are down. And Greg Porter can speak more clearly to those numbers. And he can speak more clearly to what diversion programs he has the ability to refer our young people to, our low-risk kids. We're keeping so many kids out of the system. That's why I was able to we as a management team was able to place different staff in newer positions because we didn't have the numbers of kids on probation anymore and or parole. So it's a proven concept. We've been seeing the benefit of it, and we can do a lot more exciting things with regard to diversion. And I would defer to Greg to speak more in line of what goes on with the restorative justice program over at the Office of Dispute Resolution and what diversion programming he has available. But it's really an exciting time for our department. And yeah, the goal is never to send a kid to a correctional facility. And I think we've done a great job in getting to that goal. Will we ever see it? Well, that's a goal, but there are a certain percentage of kids who just don't want to listen sometimes, or they just don't, they're still a threat to public safety, and those have to be addressed. But anyway, I can add that much at this point, and I'll defer to Mr. Porter to address those other issues.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Holman. Yes, with our diversion program, we have several opportunities for diversion. Of the number one charge that we do deal with is assaults, and they come in various forms. So if they're domestic assaults and there's a lot of family issues, a lot of times there'll be referrals for family services. It could be family counseling. It could be parenting programs, depending on the exact nature of the offense. Also, other assaults like in the community, we have anger management programs. We do one-on-one as well as groups. And, the ideal is for diversion is to look at exactly what the behavior is and what can be done to correct that behavior so the kid does not repeat that behavior. And we've had a lot of success. One of the things that was mentioned about restorative justice, that's one of my favorite programs. It's a contracted program from the county that is paid for. It's run by Dispute Resolution. Piedmont Dispute Resolution runs that program. And what I like about it is it's victim-centered. So the victim can choose to participate in the program if they want to. And the ideal with that restorative justice is to make that victim whole. And what happens is both parties come out feeling good about it. The kid has a chance to make restitution or make the victim whole in somehow, whether it's in forms of actual monetary restitution, community service, apologies, and something. And then the victim feels good because they had a say in how this case was handled and that they were heard. So it's an excellent program because it addresses behaviors and victims come out satisfied. And that's important too, because you want everyone to understand that when we don't send cases to court, we're still taking it very seriously, and that we're also, considering, there's two sides of it, that there's the accused as well as the victim. The other programs we have a substance abuse education program that we use for our first time misdemeanor drug offenses, as well as possession of alcohol. We have a loss theft program for the kids that are charged with shoplifting or other larcenies, that we look at those. And like I say, we have, great success with those programs. I say the majority of those kids that go through diversion, we don't see again. And that's what's important, that they can change their behavior. They don't have a criminal record, and decisions that they may have made at age 12 or 16 is not continuing to follow them throughout adulthood.
Appreciate that, Mr. Porter, Mr. Holman, Ms. Kirk. A great discussion, and it really highlights what we're doing in the county to really divert and mitigate as much as we can folks actually being detained. Because again, these are juveniles, these are minors, these are folks that we'd much rather try to get them into some other training, some other program, anger management, something like that, rather than criminalize them. And to that point, before we jump into the actual specific questions we have from folks that signed in beforehand to give us questions, and also the folks who are in the chat, can we just briefly talk about sort of the criteria of folks that would end up in the JDC? Because there's some misinformation, misconceptions out there that we're criminalizing the youth on a massive scale, and that even sort of smaller offenses will land a juvenile onto the JDC. But as Mr. Porter just highlighted, we have a lot of programs where we, as much as possible, try to divert and keep even shoplifting juveniles from the detention center. So if you all could just speak a little bit on that boxing criteria of what would land you in the JDC, I think it'll help highlight things for the folks who are watching online.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll start. We use risk assessment tools to determine consistency in our decision making, because that's very important. But generally speaking, we look to release kids waiting trial if they're going to go to court. If we can't divert it, we're looking at release them. So we're looking at release them to parents with support systems. We use a program that was mentioned earlier, Juvenile Pretrial Supervision Program. That's one of the resources we have. We also have electronic monitoring. The thing about electronic monitoring is if the child has services in place, those services can continue while they're waiting for a court date. So if they're, involved and it doesn't interrupt their education, it's an excellent program. And we've had a lot of success with kids being on juvenile pretrial supervision as well as electronic monitoring, and they don't reoffend while they're in that program, and they get to court, and then they deal with the consequences of the behavior that got them there. But what's important is it's a program that stops kids from being in detention that don't need to be there, and we're still able to keep kids safe. Now, in some situations, it's not that easy. Unfortunately, when we talk about sex offending behavior, a lot of times the victim is someone that's already in the home. So there's that risk factor. And then when you talk about a case going to court, there's still rights and due process that has to work out. We can't just immediately start, treating them as being guilty and doing certain things. They get, represented by an attorney, and we work with the attorney. And also you want to do assessments. You have the right treatment as well. And so sometimes these are the type of kids that may have a short stay in detention. But the good news is once we're able to get, assessments and services in place, we've been very successful with treating sex offender behavior in the community. But unfortunately, it's not something that you can just put in place right away. And then, like I say, it's got to work itself out. But that's like, one examples of the cases that I look at. But then some cases, we don't have to detain them because we might be able to place them with a different relative where there's no children in the home and get services that way. But sometimes, it doesn't always work out as fast as we want it to, but we do everything we can, because one of the things we also do in the court service units, we work with families that if a kid is detained, we still say, well, what needs to be put in place so maybe this kid can get out of detention sooner. So there's a lot of things that we look at and trying to help the situation. Like I said, our total goal is to correct their behavior so that it doesn't repeat itself.
If I could, I just want to emphasize that there is what Mr. Porter mentioned, a detention assessment instrument. And I think it's important that because that is also an equity tool, and I think that that's really important for us now, and understanding that even with that instrument, if there's a need to either I'm trying to think of a word that doesn't sound juvenile justice-y, but if there's a need to maybe override the instrument, even that requires a supervisor to approve. So you can't just decide, I just want to, I just think this kid needs to go, even though the instrument doesn't say he needs to be there. You have to get supervisor approval, no matter what time of day or night. You have to contact the supervisor to approve that if you want to go beyond what the assessment tool is telling you. So I just think it's important that people understand we don't make these decisions in a vacuum, that we actually have a tool that we use to ensure fairness and public safety which is, our ultimate goal.
Thank you for that. As again, I think a lot of folks will just want to get a better handle on, who we're actually detaining, who we're trying to divert. And it's good to again highlight the fact that there are assessment tools in place. There's analysis, there's data-driven criteria which drives these decisions. So we take a lot of the implicit bias that we see in the past out of this, where we're really looking, as you said, Ms. Kirk, at an even playing field and equity in terms of how folks are landing into the system and hopefully how we're diverting them out of the system even before they get there to begin with. So I appreciate you all highlighting that. So with that, we're going to go to the question and answer portion of this town hall. We had quite a few folks who submitted questions ahead of time. We have about 45 minutes before the end of this, so we'll try to run through as many questions as possible. Once we get through the pre-arranged questions, we'll shift into the questions we've gotten since this started. We have quite a few of those as well. Just a quick disclaimer, we've gotten both some questions in the chat and beforehand, some questions that have to do with policing and law enforcement. Some questions have to do with the schools and the SRO program. Those are sort of outside the scope of this town hall. We're really focusing in on the juvenile justice system itself, as opposed to the law enforcement aspect or the SRO program or the sort of schools as a whole. But of course, those are all topics we'd like to take up in subsequent town halls. I'm all for having those discussions. So just note that if we don't answer your question, it's not because we don't want to. It may be simply because it's outside the scope of the group that we have tonight. That being said, I'm going to shift into the first few questions we have. Just give me a moment here. And some of these were sort of touched upon already in our opening sort of dialogue. But if folks wanted to add anything or sharpen a little bit some of the response, that's fine. So the first one is, what does the long-term vision for juvenile justice look like for Prince William County? I know that's more of a question for our folks in the court system and what have you, but especially Mr. Holman, Ms. Kirk, is there anything you'd like to add to what was already being discussed?
We are continually evaluating our programming all the time. It's not a static situation. We are driven by the Director of Public Safety down through our Department of Juvenile Justice. This transformation is ongoing. And locally here, we have a Juvenile Justice Task Force that was originally initiated by our former Chief Judge, Judge Anole, and now our newest one of our newer judges, Jackie Lucas, the Honorable Jacqueline Lucas, is going to chair that task force going forward. And it comprises several community partners, Commonwealth Attorney or County Attorney, DSS, probation intake, probation, and the schools, a couple of school representatives. We're always looking at ways to improve our processes going forward. Like what about the offenses in the school setting? Why do we need to bring those necessarily to the attention of the court? Why can they not be handled in the school setting, for example? Also dealing with truancy matters. The truancy, by the time it gets to our office, it's too late, so to speak. They're truant at that point. If we're going to be effective with regard to truancy, we need to deal with that before it even leaves the school system. And getting the schools on board with that has been a great benefit in the last few years, but we're looking forward to additional benefits going forward. That's not a static process either. We're still looking at that because truancy is if your kids aren't in school, what are they doing out in the community? In all likelihood, it's probably not a good thing. So we are always looking for ways to improve the system going forward. And I think those are the major things we're looking at here locally in Prince William County, as well as I'm really anxious to see what the study that Courtney's group is initiated with the grant from DCJS and looking at what programming opportunities will avail itself from that as well.
It looks like Supervisor Boddye's connection was lost, and so I'm sure he's trying to come back in as quickly as he possibly can. I don't have access to the questions that were asked ahead of time. I can tell you in some of the other questions that have come through, one of them had to do with the group homes. I had mentioned that there used to be a boys group home and a girls group home back, I think it was before I was at DSS, so they were closed in 2008 due to budget concerns. And prior to that, youth were placed there, and the question referred to the unisex group homes. I'm not familiar with that. They were definitely a home for boys and a home for girls, and we now have in both the Juvenile Detention Center and Molinary Shelter, I think the question was going much more towards sexual identity. And we are able to, if a child presents and says they are identified in male or female, we are able to set up a situation where they and the rest of the community is as comfortable as possible. And I see that Supervisor Boddye's back.
Yes, I am. It's nothing like a brief glitch in the Wi-Fi. So it kicked me off a little bit. But yeah, I'm here right back quick. I liked the part of the answer I was hearing at the end of whichever question Courtney was answering. And I think that was one of the questions in the chat in regards to gender demographics, if I am guessing correctly. Okay.
Yes, and I will get the specific gender demographics. I don't have those right at my fingertips. And if folks would use Occoquan at pwcgov.org, then we can make sure that the information and that gender demographics can be shared. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Courtney. So next question. Give me 1 second here. Here we go. So the transformation initiatives were already spoken about in great detail, so I'm not going to rehash that ground. However, give me 1 second here. Here we go. So some studies have shown that large prison populations have a high percentage of illiterate or deficient readers. A lot of inmates have been determined to even have dyslexia. And SLD in reading, when we look at juvenile justice reform, certainly trauma-informed decisions are important, but how can we follow the problem upstream to the point of making literacy, starting with the primary grades, a priority for LEAs? There have been so much on criminal justice reform, but not much about education reform, which appears to be failing students and disproportionately students of color. Now, again, that's more of a schools issue, but it sounds to me like some of the previous answers that you all are working with some of the schools to address some of the issues, so we have some of the upstream issues being rectified before folks fall into the system to begin with. Is there anything you all wanted to add to that?
I don't have anything to add.
Not really, Mr. Boddye, because I think it's if a kid comes into our system, they're going to be evaluated in any number of ways. And if they have learning disabilities or mental issues that need to be addressed, they're going to be addressed as best as possible with the resources that we have available, whether it's here in the community or if they happen to be sent to the one lone correctional facility or a community placement program. They're not going to be left high and dry. People will be, resources will be assigned to those folks to address their needs as they progress through the system.
Appreciate that.
It sounded like you were speaking towards local schools. But
Right.
we have also transformed our entire school system within the JCC, Juvenile Correctional Center. So, I mean, we've done a complete transformation there, increased tremendously our number of youth who graduate, really, bringing it up to standards with the state, with state standards, because, there was a time when they were really lagging, particularly around kids with disabilities and, kids with IEPs. So we have done a lot of work around that, and have, like I said, we've had record numbers. We have youth leaving us with college credits now. So we've really worked diligently improving the school system within the JCC. I just think that question might have been geared more towards the local school system.
It was, and as I mentioned at the outset of the question and answer, some of these questions are more suitable for the school division, or the PD, rather than this particular group. But we still appreciate those questions, and Dee, I appreciate you especially mentioning how the JCC itself, and how we do have education that is done in our correction facilities, that's being transformed as well, because we can't just transform our school system in the public schools without also transforming the education that juveniles are getting when they're already part of the correction system. Going back a little bit to the evaluation process within the DJJ, one of our folks asked about the Annie E. Casey assessments. Could one of you speak to that issue?
Sure, Jeff's gonna. So when we started this whole endeavor almost 7 years ago, when Andy Block first came on, we invited, as a department, we invited Annie Casey to come and assess our entire system. The reduced, reform, replace, as well as the safety, connection, purpose, and fairness, all of that really stems from our assessments and what we learned about ourselves and the work we needed to do. So they drove, their assessment really drove our transformation. They were a large piece of that. So most of everything we've spoken to you about, they helped and guided us through, and we worked very closely with them to make these transformation efforts.
Thank you for that. And so again, to highlight it one more time, because I think it needs another pin, these assessments and all these are based on evidence-based practice. These are all data-driven, very in-depth. There's a lot of peer research that goes into all these assessments, a lot of years, decades-long research that go into looking at these assessments and where we feel that folks should be going in terms of programming, diversionary programs, even just seeing what level of threat they are to decide what part of the system they go into to begin with. So I appreciate that. You may have mentioned it earlier, but a lot of folks are now referencing the Missouri model. Can you speak to that for very briefly?
The Missouri model, what we call the MICE model, was real. They actually came in and worked with us from Missouri through the, Annie Casey, they have a long reach, and MICE came in. That's what they call the Missouri Youth Services Initiative, maybe. But we call them MICE, and they've come in and worked in our correctional facility, in our correctional facility. I'm trying not to use terms that people don't know, so please bear with me. And they came in, and this is where I talked to you about really changing our system from an adult prison system to a youth treatment and community center. They brought to us, they helped us and worked with us to transform to a Virginia community model. I don't want to say they brought their Missouri, everything they did here. It needed to fit Virginia. And so we have what we call the community model, is how the youth are in treatment in the facility is through communities. So they learn to live and work in a community with each other. So it's called the community model, and that stems from the Missouri model. So they did come and do a lot of work with us down there and work with us in transforming using using sort of their principles.
Appreciate that, because that is, a model that folks are starting to reference a lot
Yeah.
more, especially when you talk about these assessments and the programming that we're doing. So I appreciate that, Ms. Kirk. In a slightly different track, we talked about sexual violence and how that's something that's taken very serious, to the point that, as a matter of public safety, we try to take folks out of the situations to keep folks safe. A lot of folks have also been concerned about gang violence and gangs, and gangs, especially over the last few years, have been something that a lot of folks have talked about, especially gangs like MS-13. So where does gangs fit into the juvenile justice system? We know that in terms of at least adults, we have a special gang task force in the region that looks at these issues, and I know this is more of a law enforcement sort of track. However, is there sort of anything you all can speak to when it comes to juveniles that are especially linked to gang violence and gang activity?
Yeah, I can speak to that. In 2003, Congressman Wolf put in for an earmark for worth several $1 million to the northern region, and the Northern Virginia Regional Gang Task Force came into being. It established gang units for the various police departments in the northern region: Loudoun County, Alexandria, Arlington, Fairfax, and Prince William. And it also set up intervention, prevention, and education programming, as well as a gang response intervention team coordinator position for each locality if the locality did not want to fund it. And here in Prince William, we have a gang response intervention team, and our current coordinator is Mr. Henry Pacheco, and he has a gang response intervention team. They do community presentation. He does community presentations on gang matters. They try to set up programming or identify programming that works with kids at risk of gang involvement. And we don't do the police do the policing. We do the intervention in terms of working with youth who are identified as at risk or gang members. And our staff are, especially our intensive supervision unit, they can supervise our gang involved youth at a high level. But after a lot of gang training, they don't just walk into these cases without a lot of prior training in gang matters. There's conferences they could go to. There's a whole lot of information out there on gangs in general and conferences that they've attended over the years. Mr. Henry Pacheco has well over almost 30 years of experience working in the field of gangs in the northern region, to include Maryland. And he worked for the Northern Virginia Family Services IPE program, and we hired him away from them. Fortunately, he's fluent in Spanish, and he communicates quite well with our Hispanic community, and it's been a great benefit in terms of his ability to provide information to our Latino population in Prince William County and the cities of Manassas and Manassas Park. And he's just a wealth of information. And I mean, those families don't want their kids involved in gangs any more than we want to see them involved in gangs. And it's a tough situation when they don't speak our language. They've come from another country, for example, perhaps. And he's great at working with those types of families and communities. And so when the kids are on probation, we have gang involved youth on probation. They're supervised just maybe at a higher level of supervision to hopefully stabilize them. And if not, then we have to deal with that situation as it arises, because some of these incidents with these gangs, as you well know, and it's been well documented over the years in the paper about how violent some of these situations can be. And we have to be advised that these are happening in our communities, in the immigrant communities for the most part, for especially the MS-13, they're preying on their own folks. And it's very disturbing, and we just want to make these communities as safe as possible for all our citizens and our folks who are here from other countries. And I'm real proud of our gang effort that we have going on. There's also a human trafficking task force. One of our members of our intensive supervision program, Ms. Kuyumjian, who's an intensive supervision officer, is a Prince William County employee for the many years, is on that task force and does an excellent job at intervening in these types of cases. So it's a program that's in development and in progress going forward. We're working closely with the schools because schools will see types of behavior within the school setting before it gets out and becomes in the legal system, perhaps. So it's an interrelated effort and a community-wide effort to address that problem. And Courtney discussed that in the facility, it's difficult to separate the gangs if they are detained, like different gang members, MS-13, 18th Street. You can't, it's tough to separate them in the facility. They do the best they can, but that's an old facility and it's real small in terms of the area that they have to be able to separate those folks. At the correctional centers, I can't speak to how they run those. Perhaps Dee could speak to that, how the gangs are handled at the correctional facilities, but it is a problem at times. And, but yeah, we have a robust program here in the northern region, and we're quite proud of what we have going here in Prince William County.
Thank you for that, Mr. Homan. That was a really comprehensive answer to, you know, something that a lot of folks are concerned about, because as you said, in many of these communities, these gang members are preying upon, you know, some of the very same folks that the same community they're coming out of. So it's really important that everyone understands that everyone is all hands on deck with addressing these issues, and that we don't want to see our youth fall into gang violence, either being prey to that or becoming perpetrators of it because of the circumstances around them. That being said, to shift to another track, this is something a lot of folks sort of always are concerned about, and that's our youth with disabilities, intellectual disabilities, developmental disabilities, educational disabilities, things that, you know, make them differently abled than our neurotypical youth. So when it comes to that, how do we address those issues, and how is the situation handled? And I'm sure that's part of the assessment process, but could we speak to that a little bit and how we handle the youth that have different abilities?
Well, within our assessment unit, if we get, for example, if we get a new case coming into our office, the assessment unit, we also have on staff a court psychologist associate who can do court evaluations. We also have a DJJ CS, Community Services Mental Health therapist working on staff, funded by DJJ, although they are a Prince William County employee, and she can do several types of different evaluations. So any youth that comes in, if they're identified as perhaps having a problem, they are evaluated accordingly. If it involves a more detailed analysis, we could secure analysis through the Comprehensive Services Act, possibly saying we need to have a more in-depth analysis, perhaps maybe at a treatment facility, or they may be placed there temporarily just for an evaluation as to what is the appropriate treatment modalities for this particular youth. So we have a whole range of services that we can look at to provide us the information we need to come up with a supervision plan for kids with various types of disabilities.
If I may, Supervisor Boddye, I think one of the most important things is that we make sure, whether it is through assessment when they come through the juvenile court services, or even after they get to one of our programs, if they should get through the process a little bit, because sometimes it can be difficult to make a good assessment, to make a good diagnosis, to follow through, follow up, make sure that all the important people are involved. And that is something that all of us together are able to do. We have a very strong program with our Children's Services Act to be able to fund and help families when a youth is identified with a specific need.
Thank you. I was just going to add that is our goal, is to be collaborative, and youth who come to us with different challenges, we want to make sure that we are collaborating and surrounding them and making sure we're meeting all those needs whether it's collaborating with school, with mental health, with DSS. It's just a matter of sure we have the assessments, but as employees, we want to make sure that we are coming together and collaborating with agencies to meet those needs.
Thank you for that. And again, that's a community that a lot of folks are really concerned about, because obviously we should not be criminalizing folks that have different abilities and mental health issues, those things of that nature. So I appreciate your commentary on that. Just to jump right quick to some comment that was made in the chat. I know that we're taking a specific lens and a specific focus with this town hall, but I know that folks want us to see this as a holistic issue, and it definitely is. As a supervisor of the county board, I definitely look at this as a holistic issue. We have folks on here at this point that are definitely very zeroed in on juvenile justice and the system itself. But also we've obviously had town halls in the past on criminal justice reform. We've had law enforcement. We've had the public defender, Tracy Lennox, in here as well. We are working on some new initiatives on the County Board of Supervisors to address some of those community issues that feed into some of these challenges that play out as these challenges that juveniles encounter as they're growing up. We're looking at the new Racial Justice Commission that Supervisor Margaret Franklin championed, that looks at these issues from an equity lens, that really looks at some of these deep-seated systemic issues that we have in our society that may lead to some of the challenges that our youth are experiencing. We're also talking about affordable housing. We're not only talking about it, we're also addressing it. And that's something that's been a long sort of underserved community in Prince William County, and that obviously plays out in very many ways when it comes to juvenile justice. In this past budget, even with our challenges with COVID-19 and the economic fallout that came as a result of that, I mean, Ms. Tierney can tell you, we made very deep investments in both our social services and our community services to really look at holistically addressing the acute needs that our programs and our society has needed quite some time in the county. We're also looking at joint meetings with the schools. We've had a few meetings with the school division already, and we also had some joint meetings between our board and the school board to really tackle these issues holistically, both from a county government perspective and a school division perspective. A lot of these issues are long-standing. We're not going to be able to speak to all of them in one night, and we certainly will not be able to address them all in just 1 year's budget cycle or term in terms of our county board. But we're working on them. I just listed off a lot of issues and a lot of initiatives that we're looking at right now, and we hope to continue to move the ball forward with these issues. A budget is a statement of our society's values and our community's values, and I hope that in subsequent years, especially as we look past this COVID-19 crisis, that we'll be able to really address some of those more long-standing issues and really put forward investments that put the community first, and hopefully at the front end address some of the issues so the folks on this call won't see as many folks coming in the door and having to deal with these juvenile justice issues. Courtney, on that note, did you want to speak at all to some of the investments we made in the DSS this year and how that may link to juvenile justice in any way, shape, or form?
One of the things, whenever we have any money that we obtain, we go to the board for budgeting and appropriating, and you budgeted and appropriated a $40,000 grant that we got. I had mentioned it a little bit earlier for training, and one of the things that came up earlier about evidence-based practices I wanted to mention regarding that is that it's one thing to start a new program that's evidence-based, data-driven. It's another thing to maintain fidelity to it and keep it going. And it's really important to keep it going. And the board has been very, very helpful with funding to make sure that staff is trained and continually trained, because it is there's always something new, not like there's always a shiny penny kind of new thing, but as evidence-based practices become known, they also become even more and more improved. So that's a really important thing. The board also provided us with a lot of prevention money and support in homeless services. Now, those aren't usually youth like we're talking about now with juvenile justice, but it is not unusual to have people that are experiencing homelessness have been those who have come through a troubled youth. And so in trying to work well with people who are experiencing homelessness so that they can become permanently housed, there is another trauma-informed way to work with that. So the board's been very helpful. Another thing that the board did this year was we wanted a behavioral health therapist at the JDC who had cognitive behavioral training, and we have that because you allowed us to collaboratively work with community services and shift a position. And it's those kinds of that kind of flexibility that I think the board has been really helpful to listen to doing something efficiently and effectively, and we appreciate that very much.
Thank you for that, Courtney. I really appreciate you going a little bit more in depth on some of those programs we've been championing as a Board of Supervisors. And two more things I'd like to mention before we get to our last round of discussion here is, the in-home intensive care program through New Horizons, the board funded this year. As part of this year's budget cycle. That was an initiative that was near and dear to my heart, and it really looks at youth and families who are dealing with children that are dealing with substance abuse issues, mental health issues, disabilities, things of that nature, who these are the intensive ones. These are the folks that are most at risk, and it affects not only the youth themselves, but the entire family. And this allows our folks to go in through CS to really help these families out to hopefully keep these youth from getting further into the system and really look at things ahead of the line. The last thing I'll mention is, especially right now in terms of COVID-19 and a lot of students being left at home, this board has given through our CARES Act funding millions and millions of dollars to the school division to not only help jumpstart the reopening process, but really give the school division the tools it needs to really connect with the families that are being impacted by COVID, especially the youth, because obviously in all this conversation that we talk about in terms of schools and services, the youth are the ones that are impacted the most directly. We still need to really look after our teachers, our faculty, but at the end of the day, it's our students that are being impacted a lot by this crisis and the fact that they're not being able to be in school. So some of the issues that teachers and other mentors are able to see and refer to different programming for, they're not able to see as directly as during normal times. So we've been working with the school division very directly to help address some of those issues. We have about 12 minutes left. And so we have a couple of things left that we wanted to just sort of address before we enter into final comments. And that leads me to a couple of just very pinpointed logistic issues. So, for example, how many counselors does the JDC have and therapists?
So we have one therapist who is a staff member in community services. And we have a staff person who is, a therapist with our community placement program. The community placement program is very isolated. It is one group, and then the other addresses the other. We have a low census right now. So if you're thinking one doesn't sound like enough, it is, it is right now. And they are trained in cognitive behavioral therapy.
Good to know. And another question, let me pull that back up. Something real quick. Here we go. Okay. So YCI has formed a private public partnership to implement education, workforce, and employment residential center And we see some of these throughout the country where folks are partnering up with the private sector, with nonprofits, with other community partners. What has been done in terms of Courtney and on your side to do that, and obviously Dee and Jeff? What are some ways in which the community has partnered up with this system to help these youth? And are there other ways that the nonprofits and the private sector can help with juvenile justice? I think you're muted, Courtney.
Sorry. We have a volunteer coordinator who, because we get calls all the time from nonprofits, from faith-based communities, from civic organizations, individuals who want to come in and talk with, work with, do some sort of project with youth at the Molinari Shelter or youth at the JDC. We have other volunteers with pretrial supervision because we will bring that group of youth together. So we have a lot of opportunities. Now, people do need to be vetted. They do need to have background checks. There is a strict protocol, as I'm sure you can imagine, for the safety of the youth. But there are multiple opportunities. Not too long ago, we had some of the master gardeners from Virginia Cooperative Extension do a wonderful gardening program at the JDC, and two of the youth, they really got into it and made a decision to go into gardening and landscaping as their career when they left. So it's been a very good thing.
Thank you for that, Courtney. And actually, you spoke to it earlier, and to shift back a little bit, what is, frankly, a lot of folks are asking, what is the difference between the JDC itself and the group home and the Molinari Shelter and some of these different facilities that we have for the youth?
Yeah, so the group homes were closed. They were closed as a budget decision during the Great Recession. There was just not enough money in the county budget for operational costs, which is different than the funding that we are proposing for the discussion of building a new juvenile detention center. I know it sounds bureaucratic, but there's one pot of money for building buildings because that's not ongoing money, and then there's ongoing money for staff, and the ongoing money was cut back in 2008, which closed the group homes. So we no longer have the group homes. Molinari Shelter is a shelter that is non-secure. Sometimes as the youth come through the program, the court might recognize that it's not that what they are alleged of doing is something that they need to be securely detained, but there may be something within the family that is unsafe for the child to be there. So then where do they go? And so the Molinari Shelter serves that purpose. It is non-secure. Youth can walk out. It's not, we don't refer to the youth there as being detained. So that's the big difference between the group homes, which do not exist, the non-secure Molinari Shelter, and then the secure detention center. The secure detention center, it's locked, and it's definitely, you know it when you go there. So I hope that answers that difference.
It does, and obviously one of the key things we want to make sure is that a lot in all these facilities, we want to make sure who is the person that's being kept safe, right? In the Molinari Shelter, it's the child, the juvenile, the youth themselves being kept. In the case of the JDC,
oh, I think we lost you again.
Why they're being detained and why they,
right.
I think we're having some little lag issues here. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, and one thing that I haven't heard a term, least restrictive. We want anyone, child or adult, in any kind of situation in the least restrictive environment as possible.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Courtney. And on that note, we have 5 minutes left. So Courtney, Jeff, Dee, Greg, please, if you have any final thoughts or words to share, anything that you feel like we didn't touch upon, or that you feel like we should leave with final thoughts. This is your chance. Courtney, let's start with you.
Okay, good. I'm glad you picked me first. I did want to address that there's been so much talk about, how big the juvenile detention center should be, would be. Is it 48 beds? Nothing has been decided. The way the process works, we have DJJ requires us to do a planning study. They came out with a number. The first number was 110. We said, no way. The second number was 48. All that means is nothing could be built bigger than that, but we know it needs to be smaller than that. And we have not yet made that determination. That is something that the board will make. We are working through that. It will become known publicly. There's always public comment time at the Board of County Supervisors meeting, events like this. So we're not trying to be evasive about it. We don't know the number yet. And thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Courtney. Appreciate it. Jeff, thoughts?
Well, thank you, Mr. Boddye, for this opportunity to educate and enlighten folks, I hope. Just what Courtney did mention about least restrictive, just be advised that our staff do everything possible to keep kids in the community, to work with them, to refer them to the appropriate services after the proper evaluations. And they do a remarkable job. And our, commitment is the last resort. I mean, we never want to have to send a kid down, quote, down the road like we used to say many, many, many years ago. But there's so a wealth of resources that we didn't have all those years ago that we do now have because of transformation. And but is there room for progress? Of course, there's always better things that we could do going forward, and especially in the area of equity and racial and ethnic disparities. There's always room for us to make progress, and I think we're on that track going forward. And I just want to, again, thank you for the opportunity. And if you don't mind, I'd like to give you a call tomorrow in your office if you're going to be there, if you have a few minutes. And we could pursue another matter that is not really pertinent to tonight's discussion, if that's okay with you.
Sure. Keep in mind, we have a 1 o'clock board meeting that'll probably go for quite a while. But if you try to catch me before 1 o'clock, I should be able to have some moments to spare. So
I appreciate it. Thank you again for the opportunity this evening. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Dee, thoughts?
So first of all, thank you so much for inviting me and letting me be here this evening. DJJ, Department of Juvenile Justice, is obviously a state agency, but we care very much about the communities where our units are located. And I just want to make that really clear. And tonight, as I sit here with you, I'm sitting in Lake Ridge in my home. I'm a resident in the Occoquan district. So this is particularly near and dear to my heart. So I just want to represent that while we're a state agency, we care very deeply about all of the communities we're in, and that, that we have folks working hard to keep your community safe and improve the lives of your youth and families. And I'm just so grateful to be here this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kirk. Appreciate you. And obviously, as a constituent of the Occoquan district, I appreciate you coming out of your way to do this for us as well. I'm here to serve you as well. Thank you for that. And if you could, Mr. Porter, care to round us off?
Again, I too am thankful for this opportunity, but I'm also, I work for a state agency, so I'm very grateful for our community partners with Prince William County and Mr. Elijah Johnson in County Exec's office. He is wonderful to work with. He really, is invested and engaged every time we meet with him, and he really cares about the, kids in the community that we serve. So I really appreciate what's going on in Prince William County.
Thank you, sir. And again, Greg, Courtney, Dee, Jeff, thank you so much for your time tonight. We had a very good discussion. We've crammed a lot into just an hour and a half. And I know there were a lot of unanswered questions that folks had. Keep them coming, everyone. We had our panelists answered some questions that we didn't get a chance to answer live that we'll be able to provide to folks. So please, if you have any additional questions, please email my office. We are here to serve. We are here to answer your questions. And we will definitely continue to have ongoing conversations like this in regards to our criminal justice system, racial justice, juvenile justice, all these different issues that impact our community very directly, regardless of the climate of things right now. And if you want to send a direct email to our office in terms of having a question, we can get to the right place. You can email us at occoquandistrict.com, I believe. Let me just quickly double check that. occoquan@pwcgov.org. So again, if you have any questions for us, or you asked a previous question that did not get answered while we're live, please email occoquan@pwcgov.org. My staff, like I said, we're here to serve you. We are here to make sure that all your questions get answered and that we have a continued discussion about these issues. Thank you very much again for joining us. And again, to our panelists, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for all that you do to continue to keep our community safe and to do right by our juveniles. You know, our youth are our future. We need to make sure that we're doing right by them as well. So again, thank you so much, everyone, and have a great night. Thank you again.